So attention platforms, as you've suggested, basically trade content with viewers, and then they sell for time, and then they sell access to that time to advertisers, and that's the basic fundamental thing that's going on. So a two-sided attention platform, which I'm using not just to cover online, but to cover other things as well, essentially matches viewers with advertisers in a way that makes both of them better off, just like any two-sided platform does. The viewer gets content, and the advertiser gets an opportunity to make a pitch to that viewer. And if you think about that exchange, the content, which we don't talk nearly enough about, plays a really key role. First of all, it is the payment that is being made for the time given by the consumer, but it's also the place for inserting ads, and that's true whether you're talking about search or display, that could then attract attention. And it's also serving a role as a matchmaker for getting the right eyeballs to the right marketer. So it's sort of serving this sorting function as well. And then finally, there's a scale economy here because attention platforms get to use essentially the same content for attracting many, many different eyeballs. Now, the really interesting thing about attention platforms is that there's an enormous barter economy on the user side. The attention platforms are buying content, are buying time with content, and consumers sell that time for content. And we talked earlier about the size of these businesses. Well, you can measure it from the dollar revenue on the advertiser side, but if you think about it from the content side, consumers are spending massive amounts of time on attention platforms. That time is valuable. In the U.S., at least, people spend more time on attention platforms than they spend working. So this is an enormous barter economy where time is being traded. Now, all that leads to very interesting economics that's relevant for market definition and assessing exploitative effects and exclusionary effects. So there are very strong positive feedback effects that drive attention platforms. So the content attracts the users. The users spend time. The advertisers pay for that time and therefore fund the content that's being generated. And while users may not like ads, some cases they do, some cases they don't, what they always do is they like content. And they don't get content without the ads. Now, you might say, well, hey, you can switch your business model from being ad-supported to being a subscription service. That's not so easy to do. But the most important point is that if you want to be in the advertising business, this is the way it works with this positive feedback loop between content and users and advertisers and so forth. Advertising isn't going to go away. So therefore, these ad-supported attention platforms are going to be with us pretty much forever. Now, a key point here, which again, I don't think gets talked enough about, is the content is very valuable to consumers. So when we worry about anti-competitive effects, we really need to care about the consumers and the value of the content that they get. Okay, so that's sort of the general framework. Now, what happens when you move from that general business model, which dates back to the 17th century newspaper model, hasn't really changed all that much since, and you get to the online platforms? Well, now, obviously, you have the internet connections and software and all that kind of stuff, but very importantly, you now have data being thrown into the mix. And that becomes part of the exchange between the attention platform and the consumer and the advertiser in a way that doesn't exist for traditional platform. So the user is giving not only their time, but also their data, which has an implication for privacy. In return, the platform is giving content and ad bundles. And both the content that they're delivering to the consumer and the ads they're delivering to the consumer are both targeted with the data that the user is trading along with their time to the attention platform. And likewise, the advertiser is paying for the inserted targeted ads that users click on, the platform is providing ads in that content, but those ads, again, are targeted with the data. I think the key point to recognize here is the data is super important both for the content and for the ads, and it tends to be the same data. Now, where do you go from here in terms of the economic analysis? Well, obviously, you need to take those basic exchanges into account. So if you're talking about exploitative abuses, you need to consider both the time that the attention platform is getting from the consumer, and also the data and what the consumer is getting in return. Now, the key point here is that neither one of those things, at least in online platforms, has a price attached to it. So that complicates the economic analysis, but that doesn't mean that we can ignore that. So the big challenge in these, and I'm going to finish in just a minute, the big challenge in analyzing attention platforms and ad-supported markets is that so many of the fundamental things that we really need to evaluate for anything that we're doing, whether it's mergers, exploitative abuses, exclusionary practices, and so forth, involves dealing with a set of things that don't have pecuniary prices attached to them. The time, the content, and the data that's being provided. And those things all need to be dealt with in order to do a proper analysis. Don't have enough time to really talk about how to do that. And frankly, we don't have a lot of experience in doing that. You don't see a lot of examples of anyone doing that very carefully. I'd like to just close by maybe tying into the previous two talks by just saying that in my experience, market definition is very much tied to whatever it is the conduct is that we're trying to analyze. And I think the notion that we're going to define markets for online advertising in the abstract, without tying that to, are we talking about a particular merger? Are we talking about particular exclusionary conduct and so forth? That's a difficult thing to do. We can have a framework. We can talk about substitution and complementarity between different forms of advertising. We can talk about how these markets operate, and that's all relevant information for once we get to market definition. I had a case a couple of years ago where I was working for the Federal Trade Commission. I did define a market for advertising, and I defined a relevant market for search advertising. That made a lot of sense in that particular case. Would that necessarily be the market I would consider if I was dealing with another matter that didn't involve purchasing particular products? Possibly not. So understanding how all these things fit together, having the background and so forth, I think is really useful. I think trying to make an overarching determination now as part of a market inquiry sort of approach that these things are definitely substitutes or not substitutes, or the market is big or the market is narrow. I'm not sure. Aside from providing general information, that's really a great thing to do.